Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Sunday special. Today's three of us: myself, Jay, and Adam. Morning, guys.
Hello, everyone.
And today's a special one because we have no one's seen Adam's supplement yet. So it's got its premiere on our Facebook Live and LinkedIn Live and YouTube Live, and we'll find out what's for everyone else to see later on during the day.
It
Um,
better be good, hasn't it? It better be good.
It better be good, yeah. No, it's the most awaiting thing this morning, probably in many homes in the UK.
It's a slow news season when the supplement is it's the big news of the day. That's for sure.
No, it's yeah, it's middle of August. Lots of people on holidays. And we see that in sort of in our industry as well. Like it's harder to get through to people. With trying to exchange on a deal that we've been in legals for about 6 or 7 months on, and then our solicitors got an email saying, "Oh, we're now all ready to exchange," and he's on his way to Jordan for his honeymoon. And it always happens when there's something about to happen and people are away. And but now with the remote working, everyone is more used to actually stepping in and doing the things. But what we've got in store, what's on for today in the supplement?
Well, yeah, the little the pre teaser is going to include some stuff around what's have been happening in the US. We had the first bit of genuinely positive inflation news this week, stateside, which was inflation actually hitting a number lower than expected. And I've talked before about how there's a thousand ways to measure inflation, which have all been dusted off sort of since the 1980s, since the last time they were really needed. Um, and a few of those core ones, things that are stripping out, if you like, the volatility of the pandemic. So, for example, anyone who's tried to rent a car in the last 12 months, buying a used car is pretty difficult and the market is very buoyant. Renting one is about 10 times harder. There was a point in the last 12 months where rental car inflation was over 100%. Um, and actually, in this last month, it's gone back negative. Now, that's
Mm.
because the prices that have been hit have been so high that ultimately people have, instead of renting cars, found other ways to do things. So it's made things like the train, for example, look a lot more viable to a lot of people, even if it's a bit more of a faff. The price, I remember looking at a week that would have maybe cost us 350 quid to rent a car 3 years ago. The quotes were over £1,000.
Mm.
And you just think, you know what, I'm just not going to, you take taxis, you do this, it opens up a whole world of substitutes. So the inflation, is it over the peak? Maybe it is in the States, not in the UK yet. I think everybody knows we are so much more exposed to the energy prices apart from anything else. Even the Bank of England now predicting over 13%. The cat's sort of out of the bag on that front. October's the month because that's when the cap gets to shoot up again. And then after October, we're changing the cap every 3 months, which will give it a chance to abate a bit more. But handily enough, it'll also spread inflation on that front out a little bit as well, as it potentially gets worse before it gets better. US stock market's recovered nearly 50% of the drop from this year, which they've only the last 12 out of 13 times that's happened. So this is what I'm talking about, is a bear market defined by it coming 20% off the top. Once it's recovered half of that decline, it's gone on then beyond that to cruise to higher highs. It's not just me being difficult, but I just think this might be one of those, the one time in 13 rather than the 12 times in 13. And I'm always, if you've ever heard me talk about the 18-year property cycle, I actually quite like Fred Harrison, but he is someone who talks about opinion as fact sometimes, and he is a very hardcore trend follower. And I'm not a big fan of the 18-year cycle because in the last several cycles, it hasn't always been 18 years, so it's a bit of a trade descriptions act on the tin. But we haven't dealt with pandemics, we haven't dealt with all of these things. We've had a bit of a boom and bust market. And of course, some people think we've got a bit of a boom and bust market at the moment. But generally speaking, the acceleration and the just the amplitude of how much higher the market's gone in previous sort of melt ups has been a lot more than what it's done in the past couple of years. And the monthly figures are kind of showing a bit of calming, which we sort of discussed last week, whether we'd see a flattening out rather than anything else. And a flattening out in the course of 12 months will mean, the way inflation's going, a 10% real terms drop in the market price of housing anyway. And it still looks good. The US wage data is still positive, which gives the central bank more fuel to hike rates more. But the smart money in the States has stopped betting on 75 basis points at the next meeting, and he's betting on 50 basis points. So maybe a little bit of calming, because what they're saying is they don't need to go too hell for leather if inflation is starting to correct itself a little bit. But what the whole game is going to be about from now on is just how quickly, if we have stopped these pandemic bits of volatility, and if we don't count the energy price, because really that's being driven by the actions of a certain Mr. Putin, generally speaking, which is potentially nothing to do with the pandemic, although obviously it provided an opportunity, as he saw it. Then have we seen the last of the effects of COVID? I've seen people talking about that this week, and I'm not anywhere near convinced yet. I mean, it's crazy if you think back to December 2021. So we're only talking 9 months ago. We were fairly sure that Omicron was a watered down variant and all the rest of it, but we were still talking about lockdowns 9 months ago. And of course, if you live in China or New Zealand or a whole number of other countries you could mention, they were still pursuing a zero COVID policy, some of them until a few months ago, some of them in parts still pursuing it. So I don't see how the pandemic effects could be considered to be anywhere near washed through the system yet, personally. I suppose you think about things that are on long cycles, because commodities like lumber, for example, there's going to be a rough 12-month lag, because there's a season, and it's to do with growing, and it's to do with hiring workers. You have to do this sort of level of resource planning. But I don't think you ever see such a massive shock to a system and then expect sort of the next cycle, the next year, whatever it is, to just run along smoothly. It just doesn't really work like that. And we haven't had, in a way, you need 6 to 12 months of normality before you can declare normality, I think. And I think it's just too early. So I don't know if that's sort of human nature wanting to get through what's been a long, drawn out, stressful time for a lot of people. But I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think this is more like a media thing, because like people always like to make things rosy or dramatic, or like it has to be like one way or the other. It's never kind of measured, and it's never like your articles, right, where they like present 5 points of view, and then you just have to like almost choose what you want to do, like where you want to stand. It's always like they just like push a certain way of seeing things, and then you just have to align with it, or you are a conspiracy theorist, or like someone who's not in the right frame of mind, or something like that. It almost feels like it, because like every time there's a massive shock, there's like it takes forever for things to actually normalize. Like there'll be things that are like effects of like people's being able to get hospital appointments, being people like living for 2 years at home, like without going anywhere. And now like the flight tickets, for example, are so expensive because everyone's going on holidays for the first time in 2-3 years. Like people are like weddings are like this wedding every week pretty much, because people haven't been getting married for 2 years and they were postponing things. There's all sorts of things like that been postponed for 2 years, and there's always going to be effects of that. Some of them are going to be positive, but some of them are going to be like very negative as well. So it's very difficult to say that things are normal and being washed through the system. I disagree.
I don't think we've washed 2008 through the system yet. I mean, let's. I mean, that's a personal opinion, right? I still haven't seen the market fully recover on property values and other kind of indices from like 2012. And then before we even started to think recovery from 2012, when the market started to look quite sharp in 2014, we voted Brexit in 2016. You see what I mean? So then Brexit comes in, and then, as you were saying with the 18-year cycle, you can wipe your ass with the 18-year cycle. Sorry, Des, this isn't part of the 10 in 10. So I've got to vent the swear word somewhere. You can wipe your ass with that, because the moment you put in something completely out there, such as a Brexit vote, the vote to leave the EEC, the European Union, right? Once you put that out there, all bets are off the timelines. Then you take something that hasn't happened in the last 200 or 300 years, like a global pandemic, and all of a sudden it blows its ass out again. No one knows what way it's going to go. No one knows how it's going to affect things, right? But how do you even correct the measures once those 2 or 3 things have happened, right? Where's your absolute zero? Where's your baseline? There isn't a baseline. And even if you take your baseline pre-2007, you're looking at interest rates which are higher then than they are now. What does it look like? What's normal? What's back to basics? Look, it's the fallacy of it all is actually quite harming to society, right? Because the fallacy is, well, this is what it was like then. This is better. Bullshit. I call bullshit on it. Was it better before the 1980s when property investing started to become a thing and there was inflation up to the wazoo, or was it better before? I mean, like, are we talking about the 60s, recovery from the Second World War? No, let's go back further than that. Okay, well, now we're in World War I territory. Was it better then? No, you're right. Let's go before then. Industrial Revolution. Let's go back before then. Well, it was shit then as well, actually. No. I mean, before that. Oh, well, fuck me, before that.
Jay studied classic. I think we can go all back to Mesopotamia. And
we'll be soon where the fish are crawling out the sea to evolve on the land or something.
The amoebas. But you know what I mean? Like, it's like everyone's like, oh, we need to get back to the normal, or there's a new normal. Yeah, you're right. But but there's no going back. It's out. It's happened. There's no point trying. Have you ever tried rolling up? Have you seen those you take it out of the thing, those tents? Has anyone tried to put a tent back into its original thing again?
Yeah.
No,
Impossible.
It's out. Throw the package away. It's over. Get on with your life. God, the pain and suffering that people must go through mentally and emotionally trying to fit their lives back into that box. It's bigger. The box is a different shape. It's a different size. It contains a different thing. You just have to embrace it, right? There is. Yeah.
This is one of my favourite Jay Howard rants of modern times, to be honest. And there's a lot of things that I've observed that I sort of felt that I knew, but I didn't really have a clarity of thought. So, COVID-wise, what actually happened, if you look at the data, is that COVID was out there and more people got myocarditis, right? Now, there was a problem, and that provided a big problem for people, because people wanted to look back at what happened before the pandemic ever occurred, right? And what that then became was an argument about whether vaccines cause myocarditis or not, or what the baseline argument there needs to be. We now live in a world where myocarditis is more common thanks to COVID. We can then go on to work out how much is down to vaccines and what vaccines, if any vaccines, particularly young children, etc., can take. And it's a very, very emotive argument, right? But the baseline needs to be, oh shit, something's genuinely changed for the worse here. And the population baseline is higher, right? So we can't gauge it on what happened 3 years ago. And I strongly agree with your 2008 sentiments, because if you pick 2 things to talk about, well, one would be quantitative easing, which, remember, was that temporary measure in 2009 that's still going on, and they're trying to fix, and they've chipped. We're at 5 times the level we were in 2009. and they're chipping away in tiny bits. And if there's a big recession, we know that the cannon's going to face the other way and it's going to fire again. It's so bloody obvious. And the other one is the landlords who had ripped, to quote the great Jay Howard, ripped the arse out of their portfolio by leveraging it so high, and then at levels, at valuations that weren't really true valuations. And the market, like it does, even in the lesser parts of the country, less desirable parts of the UK, has carried those landlords now, especially in the last 24 months, to well beyond what those valuations were. But they've also been absolutely mollycoddled by a very low base rate, which now we get to 175 and beyond is not looking after them at all. So there's bound to be a couple of impacts in there. I mean, I'm still skeptical as to the quantitative tightening that's going to go on as things get tougher, and we'll see. You know, the one real parallel between the US and the UK at the moment, because they are in different parts of the micro cycle, is the job market. You know, the job market strength is still massive, and it gives the central bank that muscle to go, well, we can keep raising rates because this is what will happen, that's what will happen. And we've got a situation, well, next few weeks are quite big, because when we get to September and we see what's going to happen to pensions in April 23, we can see what happens to benefits in April 23. It'll be telling, but those sorts of 2008 effects have got to still work their way through the system. And of course, COVID has given the perfect, it's nearly impossible to talk about Brexit effects, which were the big, you know, headline in 2018 and 2019 before we'd actually really done anything. You know, what was going to happen? Well, now you look at it and say, well, actually people around the world are struggling with employment, for example. And primarily that's because there's so many long-term sick in the workforce that weren't there in 2019. Then you've got another slant to that argument of, well, how many of those self-certified long-term sick are actually sick? And I guess we find out when it's nearly impossible to put the lights on if you're on benefits, which I don't suppose the ruling party are too unhappy about, in honesty. But if they're not very careful, they're going to lose the dressing room in the middle somewhere. So it will be interesting. I think I'm coming more round to the idea that we're either having a very unconventional November 2024 election where the ruling party sort of hang on by their fingernails, hope for this recession to pass through, as the Bank of England is kind of predicting, or we have a bit of a shotgun using Rishi's methods, but maybe doubling them or something to get people through this winter, and then call a spring 23 election and say, well, actually, we're on the right, we've got this, we're on the right track. Give us a chance. While Labour still look, you know, pretty unappetizing, really. They're the thing, you know, on the menu these days now, they put all the calories next to everything. I see the Labour Party is like 112 calories, you know, spring onion and fresh air or something like that. Really, it's just not a lot. There's not a lot in there, you know. I don't know what the right analogy is for the Conservatives right now, but it's definitely something different, that's for sure.
Well, I've got Piotr discovering new words, and I would use the word clusterfuck for the Conservatives at the moment, because I think that's quite apt.
You always like your alliteration, don't you, Jay? That's the thing.
It's apt, you know. You don't call a rose by any other name, right? There's there's principles to work by here. But no, exactly. But look, the problem I find with Labour is that they say all the right things after. It's kind of like there's no preparation, there is no identification, there is no we're going to do this, we're going to do that before this happens. It's like, oh, the world's burning, let us go get some foam, let's go get some water and put it out. Brilliant. Well, yeah, you know, if you're going to open a door, you need to reach your hand out and pull the handle. Well done. You don't just walk head first into it. And the problem with them is that's kind of what it is. They have really good answers, but after everyone else has had their go, after everything else has been seen, after all the outcomes have been seen and or perceived to have been seen, then they make a statement. And it's you can't lead from the rear in government. Sadly, you have for strong government, you need to lead from the front. And I think that's been the case since probably Churchill. Major probably didn't really lead from the front all the time, maybe, and Cameron was a bit of a lettuce on occasion, more often than not. But I think
probably Blair had leadership qualities. I don't like him as a person in any way. That's a vast understatement, but he had leadership qualities.
He understood, I mean, he was still snotty nosed when he had education, right? So and he knew how to be made massive problems for the world, right? But you take that out, but only someone who could lead, not led well, could have got to how he got us into the situation we got into, right?
Someone you could say the same about Putin, couldn't you? Putin obviously has some significant leadership qualities. They might not be very nice, and what he wants to do, how he wants to abuse those is not great. But he's clearly got to be able to be the iron fist at the top of a regime like that. I mean, there's no two ways about it. And I think you probably really nicely encapsulated the Labour Party's biggest problem at the moment is there is no. This is what's manifests itself in people saying, well, I don't know what their policies are. And then the stalwart defenders come out and say, oh, he gets bad time in the press and stuff. And it's like, I don't think it is that. I think Keir Starmer is not a visionary. He's not a strategic mastermind. He's not any of the things that, and he hasn't unified what's effectively a fractured party. And you could level the same accusation at the Conservative Party as well. Yeah. But he hasn't unified them, and he hasn't got that one true vision, that clear vision that just says, right, this is what we're going to do, and then this is how we're going to achieve it. And as you say, they therefore end up just going, oh, well, this is what you should have done here. Well, we once said that you should have done this. And nobody can, apart from even probably most of the Guardian writers, can't name 3 clear policies that they are going to see if Labour get elected in 23, 24,
I'll tell you what I think, why I think this is probably a big issue for them is they have been so long sat in the rebuttalist position, right? So every forerunning or forefronting member of the Labour Party has spent the last 15, 16 odd years or whatever in a rebuttalist situation. They've been in that sedimentary secondary position where the other side has either been in coalition or been in power, or actually to a part where they were in coalition. They didn't really hold a strong position there either. So actually, a lot of their politics, a lot of their arguments, a lot of everything that they do is they're waiting for someone to do something they disagree with to argue it back. They're at no point are they at the forefront. It's always from the point of riposte, from rebuttal, and I think it's difficult for them to kind of. They have to recognise that to a degree. That's not obviously not all the issues. Like you say, every party has issues, but it's probably the one that I see is affecting the psychology of how they react, because they don't act, they just react. They're reactionists, right? And that affects their policies, because their policies aren't their policies. They're reactionary policies based on other people's policies. And I think they've gone too far down that road, and it's going to take them a little while to come back. I mean, they're suffering the similar issue to what the Liberal Democrats suffered in the mid 2000s, right? The Liberal Democrats came along, they got into the coalition. It was a Labour coalition they were in, right? And they were
Conservative.
That was it. Sorry, they were dead set against. Student loans and student fees, right? And then they literally, you haven't seen someone do a complete 180 so fast before in your life. I mean, Superman and the Flash were sitting there thinking, wow, that was fast, right? That was really fast. And they completely undermined their entire look. They're still nowhere near recovered. I think the Green Party are probably doing better than they are. They're still not a fringe party, but they're marginal. It's a shame they're not doing better, because maybe you could hope they would have put a better energy kind of strategy in place if the Greens had a little bit more authority, perhaps. But yeah, there's so much fracturing in the UK parties at the moment. But you don't have to go too far afield to see the similar level of chagrin and shenanigans in other countries, in other kind of governments. So it seems like that's a new pandemic in itself. Leaders that can't lead and oppositions that can't oppose.
Yeah, there is a worrying trend in all of that. That is for sure. And it's difficult because you don't want to get, as Piotr said earlier about media hype and clicks and all the rest of it. You don't want to get too tied up in all that, but you do. Well, obviously, a number of people thought that Johnson had done it relatively deliberately. Putting idiots around him makes him look better, or at least makes it harder to depose him. That seemed to be potentially part of what was going on. Not sure if I agree with it or not, really. Whether it's just a poor crop of politicians because the jobs they could be in could be so much more lucrative, and the side of it of having all your private life washed in the papers and all the rest of it, it's just not much of a great option really to be a politician. Not sure which way around that is, and there is always that interminable debate about, in Germany, I think you get about €250,000 a year if you're an MP. And they tend to be fairly well balanced on this sort of stuff, and it would be interesting to see whether you get some different candidates if you did pay that sort of money. I don't know. I think most people do it because they have that guy. Why do most people get into the NHS? It's probably the reason why most people get into politics. The problem is when you've been in the rotten barrel for a while, you've lost all your visions of doing good and changing the country and the world and all the rest of it. And it just becomes a horrific cesspit you have to crawl out of every so often and try and climb the ladder before you get brutally deposed, as everybody does at the end of the day. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, got a message from Helen that she's sat on the right way watching the show. She's flying back to London today.
Hopefully she's not sat on the runway for too long in this heat.
God, yeah.
It's almost like having this chap on Twitter who set up those bots that track celebrities' jets. So we have a tracking thing for Helen. She's about to.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, Musk wanted to shut him down, didn't he? Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
Good stuff. Now I think we could talk about politics all the time, but I think politics also makes very little difference to businesses and stuff, right? I mean, they do, but at the same time, it's like if you rely on politics to make a difference in your business, it's a bit late. Or
I think you're dead right, Piotr. And I think the thing is, it provides as much opportunity as it provides hardship ultimately, because there will be people who have made mega bucks out of Brexit because they've been able to, where the market and the traditional trade routes and whatever else have fallen over, they've been first in to come up with a solution. One of the industries I noticed that's popped up is automated customs clearance software, because you hear them advertising for it sometimes on the radio, basically doing the compliance and the paperwork for you. Well, on the bright side, that's created a few jobs, hasn't it, and a few businesses. So there's something in there. There's positives within the negatives. And you're quite right. If you sat waiting for things to happen all the time, it's like same attitude as the base rate, really, isn't it? Yes, there's actions that you need to take around changing expectations. But if all you're going to do in the morning is fire up Bloomberg and wait for things to happen around you, don't be surprised when you're always chasing your tail and you can't even do what the market can do with you not even getting involved in it. Same as the Labour Party. If you're always following, then what result do you expect to achieve ultimately?
Yeah.
Well, I was speaking to a friend yesterday. He works in like logistics and warehousing and ports, like bonded warehousing and stuff like that. I don't know if it's in the news. I haven't seen it, nor have I looked. But he said that there's the workers that operate the ports, harbours and docks. They're all going on strike. They're all going on strike because everything is being automated. Apparently, I think it was the example he gave was Falmouth. He said in Falmouth, they're going to take, he's got like 8 or 10 cranes that are operating, lifting up these big shipping containers. And apparently, you need X number of people to operate it. It's now all going to be operated from a central point somewhere else remotely. So someone's going to have a 10, 15 kind of screens and a little joystick, and we'll do it all remotely. So they, and apparently he said, well, it's really upsets them because they've spent the last X number of years saying that things should be done quicker and easier and blah 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 and more health and safety. So they brought all of this stuff in and they're doing themselves out of jobs. So apparently they're going to be going on strike. But everyone's going on strike. The postmen are going on strike. Train drivers going on strike. Doctors and nurses, I imagine they're the more legitimate ones going on strike. But they got, everyone. There's strike action all over the place.
It's the precursor to that has me somewhat concerned, really, because people start talking about civil disobedience with a reasoning behind it, and as soon as you start to cross that line, it can become a bit arbitrary. And what the big problem that Insulate Britain had and Extinction Rebellion have had is not really that the cause is not a worthwhile one, because most people are in agreement it's relatively worthwhile, but the people who get inconvenienced by their civil disobedience are the wrong people, and they don't deserve to be inconvenienced like that. So, and the problem is, to an extent, the people at the head of those organisations hold quite a lot of arbitrary power over, people taking part in those protests are going to go to jail. They're going to get criminal records. It's going to affect their lives in a negative way. And who are you to decide whether you should glue yourself to the M4 or the M5 or the M40, or in fact do something completely different that might actually get a more clear message across and perhaps offer, a way through this, rather than just sort of shouting, saying, insulate all the houses. Well, all right, yeah, great. But you need to put something on a plate. And the thing is, the people involved in those movements, they're white collar, heavily middle class, have got the nous and the intelligence, apart from anything else, to put together a proper plan and then try and get it listened to, rather than sort of beat the chest. And I've heard some of the analogies they've given over the past sort of couple of years. They've been in the news, one of them being the suffragettes, and is it Emmeline Pankhurst or Emily Davidson who threw herself under the horse at the Derby or whatever? And it's just like, do me a favour, guys. You're really not on the same level with the same, clarity of argument here. You just look like a few idiots causing trouble because you enjoy causing trouble.
Yeah, well, it also, it's to be honest, it sounds like Jordan Peterson. It's been 32 minutes since we mentioned his name, but Jordan Peterson had there was something. He was on a panel and someone said something, and he said, "Well, look, a lot of what people are saying these days, it's genuine, but a lot of what people are doing is because they want to be seen to be doing this. These people that do the Extinction Rebellion, they'll go back to their 6-litre V8 engine cars, and they'll go on they'll do all these things. They'll live in their massive houses. They'll be fueling their second home wherever. It's kind of like they're doing it because they want to be seen to be green, or they want to be seen to be good people. But then the moment that the protest ends, or the moment they've been done this, or the moment that day finishes, like the con men people that are on the street begging for money, then they go and drive their BMWs home, right?
Yeah.
It's that there's like some people just do it because they want people to think that there's something. They don't do it because actually when they go home, they live in a house made of cork, and there's glass bottles that's trapping the heat, that's fueling the tank of water that gives them their bath. They're not those people. That's not those people.
No.
So the hypocrisy of it is actually astonishing. And it's not the only area in society where there's massive amounts of hypocrisy. But it's kind of like, okay, be a hypocrite on your own time, in your own space, in your own way. Don't disadvantage. Don't ruin other people's lives in the process. Simple rules. Is what you're doing hurting yourself or hurting somebody else? No. Then crack the fuck on. I've got nothing to say about it. But if you're hurting yourself, don't. It's unnecessary. If you're hurting other people, don't. It's unnecessary. And that's what these people don't realize. They're hurting other people and they're not making a point. It's not valid. No. They're not coming at it from a point that's valid. They're coming at it from a point of, I want to be seen to be doing this because then I can tell Deborah, my next door neighbor, that I'm an eco warrior, or I can. It's bollocks. All of it.
Couple of questions. Given our interesting political economy, where would you guys invest, take full advantage, and as a specifically in real estate? Um, no, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I've been looking quite closely at some of the Freeport areas. I don't suppose the Freeport idea has got to where they'd like it to. I've got the dreaded device overheating message, so I might tap out at some
Wow.
stage. Then I'll warn you in advance. But yeah, I think some of the Freeport areas are really interesting, but you've got to see how those funds actually get allocated and what the plans are to do something worthwhile. It's not good enough just to be a Freeport. I have no doubt there will be some successful Freeports and some absolutely wasted damp squib Freeports. So
Yeah,
that's one possibility. I still think industrial looks pretty good. Most worlds lead to that looking pretty decent. The fear that I have is that the yields get tampered with because of the changes in the risk-free rate of return and the base rate. So we've really got to see how some of that inflation and all the rest of it plays out. But I
mm,
think most roads lead to that being relatively robust, given that the goods.
good.
And there
Device
you go.
over.
Till next week, ladies and gentlemen. Talk about keep you on tender hooks.
So the Sunday supplement's not out yet. Adam's not here. Device overheated. Proper drama. Like you can make a proper massive dramatic article out of it. Um,
Well,
yeah.
that's a good question, Steve. I was thinking, there's a whole new wave of migratory workers, the digital nomads, and they may move around, but they do find certain countries to settle in, right? And actually, I think people are leaning more towards transitory than fixed living standards, right? So, I would do some research as to where the digital nomads seem to be collecting. They tend to be more like bohemian style, um, not off grid, but like where their cost of living is low, but the cost of living is low, but the value of living is high,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
we've seen some places in Portugal where it's like the digital nomad communities there are huge, and same
Yeah.
thing with like Mexico and places like that. So I don't know much about either marketplace, but I see that as that's part of the you can't put that back in the box now. Like these
Mm,
people can work from wherever they want, and the quality of life for them is worth more than the dollar that they're bringing in at the end of the month, and I don't see that changing massively. And then obviously you've got digital real estate, which is a really interesting
oh.
thing. But I think follow the digital nomads, but don't do it digitally.
No, I think yeah, you're right. Like the trends that are there with people doing things differently and from different locations and being location independent. Those are the good things. So investing maybe in like those co-working spaces, those co-living spaces, and like certain locations. There's always like I think we've been speaking with a few people actually, and I met a few people who are doing this massive co-living project in Ericeira in Portugal, and they're kind of creating like very good quality housing and also connected with all the other sort of officey type bits and the things that are missing in Portugal because there's never been a need for that kind of stuff. The things in Portugal happen in quite kind of traditional ways, conservative ways. There's big offices, people always have spaces to work from. There isn't really much of a co-working kind of community. It's growing, but it's not set up to run with other things. So I guess that's there's a lot with that, even in the UK. But what else? What else is there? That's
I mean, Adam's point on free ports is brilliant. I've been ranting on these Sunday lives periodically about free ports because the normally when the free ports are declared and where they decide how much investment's going into it and where they're going to place it, it becomes the stamp free zone as well. So you get stamp duty exemptions in free port locations. It's not just residential that gets the investment; it's commercial, industrial. I personally think, I think Liverpool's a free port. I mean, in the Mersey, I think Southampton and Portsmouth are going to be gone.
Felixstowe,
Yeah.
Humber region, Liverpool, Plymouth, Solent. Teesside, Thames.
I mean, for us, I think like the Kent and Portsmouth and the Solent, those are like geographically not a million miles away from where we invest on a semi-regular basis. But I think that's a great area to like be looking to move into early doors here in the UK. But yeah, I think that's great. I still think commercials are a brilliant asset. The number of people during COVID who quit work and started their own business, right? Who are either going to be wanting to, whether it was just a business where they were Amazon drop shipping their product to a point where they're like, I need to grow my business. I want a high street position. I want people to be able to recognize my brand, to be able to evolve into that. Or people that have got home offices that are thinking, right, I want to grow that culture. I don't want to just be at home. I want one or two members of staff. I want to, do 2 or 3 days in an office, or I want to just be networking with other business owners. I want the opportunity to be out and going for coffees and stuff like this, getting things back to something. I think commercial is massively undervalued at the moment. So something to look at.
Yeah, it's undervalued, and also it's more difficult to finance. So
Yeah.
people who can get their hands on finance or can get their hands on some cash, then they can do good things with commercial property, especially if there's a bit of a long-term vision behind it, and also if you can perhaps add things together, put them in portfolios, have buyers ready for it. That's I think that's where a lot of value is locked in currently. Yeah, it's another follow-up comment from Steve, resident of ours, going nuts. Build to rent looks better than ever. What do you think are the best opportunities?
Well, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, it's probably touched on something that we've mentioned here already. Is actually the build to rent model is a really interesting one. I do I judge. I'm on the judging panel of the Property Investor Awards, and I think 2 years in a row there were applications for build to rent schemes. One of them was in Scotland. It was absolutely unbelievable. But it's and I think it's a brilliant strategy. The other thing I like about the whole build to rent thing is if you can incorporate this live work build to rent situation where you're creating an ecosystem within a building, you're creating a community almost where there's like a live, so there's a habit, work, live. So you've got a habitat that's your own. You have a workspace where you can co-mingle and co-work, and then there's some kind of social element, whether it's a rooftop with a bar, or whether it's a swimming pool, depends on where you are, whether it's a pool table, whatever it is, where you're kind of, I think really that's a bit of the future, because people now want, for mental health reasons and big parts of society, it's where you're in a flat, you're in 4 walls and you're enclosed, you're by yourself. If you're in an HMO, depending on who your tenants are, either you enjoy that environment or you don't. But where you've got that live work, where you've got those separate environments, those separate areas, actually, I think people are going to be really very attracted to that. And the whole kind of start from the build point upwards means that you get to be very divisive with how you create that environment and that structure. And I think that's a really, really cool opportunity.
Divisive. No idea what that means in this context. Anyway, I think that that's a good summary of those build to rent projects, and it's a good couple of good questions from Steve, and Adam Lawrence is back. Wow, the most awaited comeback.
So I put the phone in the fridge for 10 minutes. So it's not a tactic I've ever used before, but it seems to have worked.
You've missed a couple of superb questions, Adam, and we got 10 minutes left, so it's definitely worth. Do you want to put Piotr, do you want to put Sam's last question up, because I think that was a really good one.
This one about resident of values going nuts, build to rents.
Yeah, that's a tough one, isn't it? Because the thing is, the problem with build to rent is it seems that the projects work on such long cycles that it's very, very difficult to. So what I was told 3 or 4 weeks ago by a friend of mine who sold quite a lot of stuff to funds and things like that is he said a lot of the North America, he's done quite a lot of business with North American funds, and he said they've pulled out of a lot of the markets they were involved in with him because their 5-year view or their 10-year view is not as positive as it was. And of course, when you're looking at a project with a long cycle, that's the issue that they're dealing with. So I know they look great today, but I don't know whether the 5 and 7 and 10 years views are looking quite as positive or not. But then the flip side of that is, what else do they put the money in to an extent? I mean, I like build to rent. The only potential downside, depending on how much you're dependent on the leverage, or whether you're allocating capital, or whether you're trying to recycle, or what you're trying to do, is that you don't hit those refinance values at the level you could sell things at, and that's the one slight risk. But if you can leave some money behind, it de-risks the whole development model quite nicely for me. And I particularly like converting rather than coming out of the ground to achieve that. I think it's always a robust model in any environment, and it adds nicely to the asset base. Pretty tax efficient way of doing things, pretty VAT efficient way of doing things if you set it up in the right way. There's not a lot not to like about it, I don't think. I think the only thing I would say is I try and steer clear of doing what the bigger players are doing. So if a local analogy for me would be, I wouldn't want to be converting a building into 10 flats in Digbeth at the moment, because there's about 5,000 flats in various parts of Digbeth popping up, and I don't want to join the competition for that market, really. So ideally somewhere slightly different, maybe serving a different demographic, maybe building to rent for social housing, for example, would be something else to consider, because there's that level of insulation. And I think social in general provides a fair amount of insulation at this part of the cycle. But I think we need to see what's going to happen to LHA rates and the likes, and look at some of next month's announcements, because I think we're going to be looking at those very, very closely. But counter-cyclical wise, it's really quite tempting at the moment. I was speaking to a decent sized social housing developer, and he wants to get into doing some private stuff. And I was like, I just don't necessarily feel it's the right time for you to make that transition. Now, if you're coming across sites, I mean, normally speaking, he's coming across sites that only work for social. They wouldn't work for private development, and that's why they're in his sites, because they're not easy to find, but they're easier to find because there's far less competition at the level at which he's developing them in the social sector than there is in the private developer sector. So, yeah, I think any time where you can keep the risk down and get the returns where you want them to be, it's always going to be a good cycle. But I think maybe you might find some difficulties getting it funded, potentially. I don't know. That's just my feeling.
Yeah, interesting. Well, we've got a comment from Matt saying it's awesome listening. Thanks, Matt. And another one, there's no sisters today. Wow.
No, Helen's in transport. She's on the way back to the UK.
Yeah. She's with us in minutes, and she's watching, so she's making sure that we don't say anything too crazy. Steve, another question or actually comment. Converting underused office to multi-use live workplace social housing sounds interesting. Thanks for the insight.
Yeah, I think the other thing is potentially some elements of retail, depending on what sort of size things you're looking at. Leisure, I'd rather be in leisure than I'd be in retail or converting to leisure. The downside maybe again can be you've got to put the capex in at the front end, generally speaking, and then you've got to get a trailing revenue stream. But if I think of the example of the centre we're involved in, again, because we've bought it already built, commercially it wouldn't be viable to build a new one where it is. So if you can make it decent enough for people to keep coming back and coming back, even if there is a bit of front end effort involved in that, then you've got a good captive audience. What's COVID proved? People still like going out and doing stuff. And if anything, they may be like going out and doing stuff more. They might be slightly constrained by the financial circumstances at the moment. So you've got to be able to deliver some good value. You've got to make it affordable. But if you look at, say you pick cinema, for example, the big chains are in trouble, but the only way they're sort of reacting to it is prices are just going up and up and up and up and up. And if you've got a family, it's very easy these days to go to the cinema and spend 75 quid, before you then think about going to Bella Italia afterwards or whatever the choice of, fairly bland, family-friendly establishment is. Other restaurants are available, I should be clear. But, I don't think that's the way to beat Netflix. I don't think that's the way to beat Netflix or Disney Plus or whatever. Just by, it'll always be a different experience. They've got to be better at segmentation rather than just going, well, do you know what? We've spent X million on developing this facility, so now we've got to squeeze it, and to the point where only 15 people are going into each screening. I mean, it's not going to be sensible, and there's still moving part, and you need 3 mortgages to pay for the pick and mix or whatever these days. I mean, it's just not even viable. It's crazy. It's more expensive than printer ink, which is the most expensive commodity by weight in the world, or whatever. So we'll see. But yeah, I think retail some of the retail bits I've seen being converted to leisure seem to make sense and are quite symbiotic if you're going into the sort of shopping centre style market, because they'll generate more footfall and the retail elements generate footfall, and you want to be by those, buy them high, sell them cheap, the TK Maxxes and the Primarks and the Range and those sorts of shops, because it just means volume of people, and that's got to be good for a bit of experience. I like the Hollywood Bowl. I don't know if anyone's been to Hollywood Bowl, but the model is quite robust because yes, there's bowling, but there's also the bar, there's also the restaurant, which is definitely passable, and there's also the amusement arcade, which you turn the lights on and it makes money. So it's quite a robust multi-use. That sort of doesn't have to be bowling. It could be, you could create that sort of vibe around any of that sort of thing, but it stands up and it washes its face, and it always has done, really.
Apparently, one of the things that's a very kind of growing sport in the world is paddle. And like especially in Portugal, Spain, those countries, it's really popular. But I've been meeting some South Africans and other people, and they're saying it's a growing sport in the world, and those paddle courts are actually quite a good kind of money spinner.
So what's it like, Piotr? Is it like squash but with a different racket sort of thing, or?
It's like a combination. It's like in between tennis and squash. So it's usually played 2x2. And also the court is kind of like there's a glass box with some metal bits, but it's more like tennis in terms of intensity, because you play against the player, not against a wall. So, but you use it as well. It's quite popular, and also in many countries there aren't facilities for it, and actually getting those facilities is fairly cheap. It's about 20-25k per court, and if you get like 6 courts, then it's actually a good money spinner in good locations, because people want to play that sport, and it's like it's
so it's not like endorsement. I played it and I enjoyed it, and I
doesn't enjoy many sports. It's very social sport.
Yeah, I'll play pool or snooker till my arm falls off, but I actually really enjoyed paddle.
And apparently, it's got a social element to it, to the extent that apparently it's quite a divorce-producing sport, because people get so into this, and then they meet a lot of other people. Apparently, I've never verified the data, but I've been hearing gossips.
What do you get when you put 4 people in a glass box, I suppose? Yeah.
It's a Schrodinger's marriage, that, isn't it? It's both alive and dead at the same time.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure Piotr will do the PR for bringing paddle to the UK in a big way, but nonetheless,
I do think also like a massive thing to it is like that if it's Portugal and Spain, like those people are very social and very differently. They've got different ways.
But it's like they're competitive with it. Like they're like, we're in Portugal and they're like, it's manana. They're the most chilled people. You put them in that box and all hell breaks loose. Like they the communication, the eye contact, the rigor, it's all there. And you think, right, shit, we've got to step up. It's good fun. It is good fun.
The dictionary definition of compartmentalization. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
No, but that's one of the opportunities as well, I guess. Like creating those kind of socially, like things that bring people socially and also are a bit competitive a little bit. There's benefits to it other than.
Yeah, it's a little bit like the sort of social gaming market in a way, isn't it? To an extent, because it's kind of like have fun with your friends rather than do it alone. And obviously, if you can, squash is great, but intensity-wise, you generally don't. You're not going to sit and play for 2 hours or something unless you're a world-class player, and you don't feel like a beer afterwards. Just feel like a shower, pretty much. So it does make sense. It does make sense.
Yeah. Brilliant. Cool. Well, we're past 11. I've got some guests with me, my sister and the niece and the partner. They all came to Portugal. So Jay came out, they came back. So I need to put revolving doors in my hammered hostel.
Sounds good.
But yeah, we've got some plans for later on, and they're like quietly waiting in the kitchen for me to end the chat.
Cool.
Them 11. But it's been good. It's been good chatting.
Always. I've got a supplement to write anyway, so better crack on with that.
What time people can expect that?
Should we tease them with about? I think it's gonna take a few hours work, to be honest. So I'd say probably 2:30, something like that.
Yeah, so by tonight.
The Portuguese-inspired manana supplement of.
We've got accountability now. So literally at 2:31, you'll be getting phone calls, WhatsApp, Facebook messages. Where is it? We need it.
I hope so. I hope so.
Nice one. Now, brilliant chat, guys. Have a good Sunday, and looking forward to reading the supplement later on.
Thanks, guys. Take it easy.
Cheers,
have a good one. Thanks for all the questions. Cheers.